Hi, I'm Elise, and I hope you're all doing so good today. We are going to be going over my July, is it July? Yes, July. My July wrap up. In the month of July, I read, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books. But I'm going to be talking about 9 today because I finished a book on August 1st that goes along with some of the other books that I'm talking about. So I'm going to be lumping that one in. So I'm going to be talking about 9 books today, but I read 8 in the month of July. So I'll go ahead and dive in. The first 3 that I read this month are the next 3 volumes that I was on in the Spy Family series. This is a manga series. So I read 5, 6, and 7. Is that right? Yes. These I really enjoyed. The volume 5 I gave 3 stars. This one I gave 4 stars. This one I gave 4 stars. The 5th volume was my least favorite that I've read so far. And I mean, you could kind of tell because Yuri's on the cover, and I hate Yuri. Yuri can choke. So I knew I wasn't going to like this one as much going in. The other 2 I really enjoyed. This series, if you haven't heard of it already, I've already talked about it like who knows how many times on my channel, but this is about a spy named Twilight who needs to infiltrate a private school. So in order to do so, he has to find a kid and a wife in order to admit the child into the school. And he finds an adopted daughter who is a telepath, but he doesn't realize it, and finds someone who will be his wife who is an assassin, and he doesn't realize it. So Yuri is the assassin's brother. We hate him. This woman is another spy, and this guy is the son of the person that Twilight is trying to get close to in school. So those are these volumes. Really enjoyed them. And I am gonna watch the anime that has come out recently, so I'm looking forward to that. All right, the next book that I read this month is Cursed Bunny, and this is by Bora Chung, and this is translated from the Korean by Anton and published by Hanford Star. And this is a kind of like horror, sci-fi, fantasy collection. It's a mixture of all of them. Overall, I did really enjoy this. I gave this 4 stars. I've seen a good amount of people not liking this, and I have also seen a lot of people saying that the first story was just like absolutely disgusting. And so I went in expecting it to be way more, I don't know, explicit than it was, at least in my opinion. So the first story is about poop. And it's about like a person who's sort of being made from someone's waste. And it does talk about it, but I didn't find it overly grotesque in any way. I don't know if that says something about me, but I didn't find it overly grotesque, and I actually thought it was a great story. So yeah, I overall really enjoyed this. These stories had exactly what I want, which is like there's a point or like something you're trying to get out of each story, which I really enjoy. I like the stories to have some type of commentary on something, and these ones did a really good job of that. I also really liked Snare, which I know is a popular one, which focuses on a bunny who bleeds gold, and the man that finds this bunny does some pretty tragic things to the bunny, but then that also plays out in a very interesting way in his life. So that one I really loved. I really loved the first one. There were so many in here that I really did enjoy. About 5 or 6 of them I really loved, and then some other few I thought were just so-so. But yeah, I thought this was a great collection. Not every story is horror, so if that is a deterrent for you, I would maybe try this. And even the ones that do border on horror, it's just slightly. I didn't think this was overly scary or gory or anything like that. So I do think if you're interested in some horror, this could be a really good place to start. So overall, really enjoyed this. Thought it was great. And then the next book I read was this Chunkster. This is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, and this is published by Knopf. This is a proof copy, so it looks a little different, but the black and white version of the cover is on the inside. I can show it to you. That's what the US copy looks like, but in color. And it's the colors of the outside here. So this book I loved. I gave this 5 stars. This was my favorite book of the month. And lots of people have read this and loved it. It was longlisted for the National Book Award. It was also shortlisted for the Women's Prize. It's gotten lots of hype, and it is really, really great. So this is historical fiction, and this follows a dual timeline, but one timeline is more prominent than the other. And the main timeline follows Marion. I think her name's Marion. It's been a while. Marion, and she is wanting to be a pilot. So her whole life, she like has this experience when she's young of seeing planes like come very close to her. She lives in Missoula, and she just decides then and there like that's what she's meant to do with her life. And her kind of dominant narrative is following her journey of trying to become a pilot. She has kind of a challenging upbringing in that her father is in prison for a kind of very gray area type of thing, and she lives with her uncle and her brother, and her brother Jamie is a painter, and he is like very sensitive, loves animals, and Marion is very like direct, focused, and in some ways kind of has to be cold as a defense mechanism, but also because she's a woman and men don't treat her well. So she also at one point gets involved in some criminal activity as she's growing up, and you see how that unfolds throughout her life and the implications that that has. And this also has some like bisexuality in it, so there's some bi representation, which is really great. And then it also follows Jamie in that storyline and his kind of life developing as a painter. Their uncle that they grew up with is a painter, but he is very much an alcoholic and a gambler. And you see how that affects the children in his own life. And Jamie has like his own large storyline. And there is a really strong bond between Jamie and Marion. And that was really great to see. I loved the sibling relationship and that they're very opposites in some ways, but they still are the only two people who can really understand what the other one has gone through and has really been there to experience all that they've experienced. So there's a unique way that like each one of them has memories of the other person's life that even they might not have anymore, and this deep bond that comes from that. So I really love those aspects. The other storyline is in present day, and this is following, oh gosh, what is her name? Dear God, that took me so long to find the name, you don't even know. So her name is Hadley, and the present storyline, Hadley is starring in a film adaptation of Marion, and Hadley has kind of just been involved in a scandal. So she was caught cheating on her like co-star in a big previous franchise that she had been in that like everyone says is supposed to be like Twilight, and she is trying to make a comeback of sorts, but also just trying to find herself because she's pretty young and got into acting very young and feels very lost. So she's trying to find herself through this story of Marion and finds similarities and differences she has between her, and just this like what it's like to have purpose, quote unquote, and if she even feels like that is a part of her life. Her storyline is definitely way less than Marian's, so it's much shorter, you get a lot less of it, but her voice was very unique, and I think that it played well in being able to provide commentary on Marian's story in a way that we couldn't get just in Marian's timeline. So I really appreciated the new timeline for that. The new timeline, the present timeline, was much more thinky, and in that way added a lot of reflection that I appreciated. So I really love this book. It reads so quickly. I know a lot of people have said this as well, but this book is very long. It's like 600 and something pages, but it's so quick to read. And the writing is phenomenal. It's very smooth, and just was like a joy to go through. And I don't read a lot of historical fiction, and I very much enjoyed this. So that was Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. The next book that I read this month was a poetry collection, and that is Machete, and this is by Tomas Morin, and this is published by Knopf as well. And this has a gorgeous cover, like so nice, and I really enjoyed this poetry collection. I gave it 4 stars overall. I would say it's probably the second best poetry collection I've read so far this year. And this poetry collection spans a lot of things, but there are poems related to COVID in here, and those are my favorite poems in this collection. And I haven't read a lot of COVID works, and I thought this one did a really good job of encapsulating what some of those experiences were like and how isolating and new and uncertain everything felt, and I think it did a really good job balancing all the emotions that lots of people were going through. So if you're interested in poetry and you are curious about reading some poetry related to COVID, I think this could be a good one. Not every poem is related to COVID, only a handful of them, but those were by far my favorite. So that is Machete. All right, the next book I read was a library book, and that is The Woman in the Library. So it's apt that I got it from the library. And this is by Sulari Gentill. And I think I mispronounced it in the previous TBR video. I said Gentile, but I think it's Gentill. And this is published by Source Books. And this is a mystery. It's kind of a like locked room mystery. So there are 4 people who are in a reading room of the library, and they hear a scream, and they find out later on that somebody in the library was murdered. A woman was murdered in the library. And we start to suspect that it's one of the 4 of them. And the reason we suspect this is because this story is actually a novel that's taking place within the book. And you don't find that, I mean, you find that out in the very beginning, but you get like that first chapter that you think that's the story, and then you realize that that's a novel that's happening within the novel. And so this book has some meta elements, and the author of the book within the book is sending chapter by chapter over to someone they know to give them notes and edits, because they're setting this book in New York, and they're not originally from New York, they're from Australia. So they're at the end of each chapter, they get notes back from this friend on the chapter. So that's the premise of this book. This book is very meta, like I just said. So there's lots of layers going on. There's even like one more layer that, like, in the book within the book, the main character is writing a book. So there's like 3 layers of books. It's like book inception. It's kind of crazy. But I overall thought the mystery was done pretty well. It was very interesting to try and figure out who it was. I will say this book was a little too on the nose for me. So sometimes I like that, but this one felt a little bit like there were so many like obvious red herrings. And I was like, okay, this is like too many. It's like almost farcical at this point, how many blatant red herrings you're throwing out. And because of that, you can almost guess who the person is, because you've thrown out so many red herrings about every character except for like one character, basically. So I didn't love that aspect of it, where it was like maybe they were trying to be cheeky, but it just didn't work for me. And the other thing is the end. This end made me so mad, honestly. It made me so mad. And it's not even to do with the mystery. The last sentence just totally opens up a weird side plot can of worms that, like, I don't get why the author did that. I won't say more than that because I don't want to ruin it, but I did not understand why that was put in. It just totally was like, okay, what? Like, what am I supposed to think about that? And like that, I don't know. It seemed very weird. So I gave it 3 stars. Overall, it was like a really good time reading it, but I didn't like some of the like blatant on the nose things. It didn't work for me, and I really was like pissed off by the last sentence. I don't know if there's supposed to be a sequel. I haven't heard that this is supposed to be a series, so who knows. And if you like mysteries, this is a really interesting one, so I would still recommend reading it, but just be aware you may or may not be pissed off by the ending. The last book that I read in the month was Rabbit Cake, and this is by Annie Hartnett, and this is published by Tin House. And this book I have a video on already. It was in a try chapter video that I did, and overall I enjoyed this book. I gave it 3 stars. It's following Elvis, who is a 10-year-old whose mother dies at the beginning of the novel, and it's following her and her family on how they deal with the grief of losing their mother. It's all from Elvis's perspective, but she's kind of commenting on what she sees the other family members going through, and they're all processing the grief in very different ways, and even problematic ways. So we're just following this family on how they deal with it. She is a very, very, very smart 10-year-old, and also like not just intellectually smart, but like emotionally intelligent. But there were inconsistencies with that I just really didn't jive with, and that's part of why I gave it a lower rating. Of like, sometimes she would be very emotionally intelligent, and then other times she'd like make a really weird, like immature remark, and like I was like, I don't get like how 1 second she can be really emotional intelligent and the other one she's not. And for me, that just felt like the author was doing what was ever convenient for the plot, and so I didn't love that. But the writing was really smooth overall. I read the story really quickly. I think I read it in like 3 days, and I enjoyed the family dynamics. I appreciated the different representation on grief and how that might manifest. I appreciated the sibling element to this, and how 2 sisters who are very different and have a different understanding of their mother can try and reconcile that. And also a father who was previously not very involved in his child's life can try and reconcile with that as well. So this is really good. There's a lot of interesting elements going on here. There's like sleepwalking going on. There's lots of like criminal activity going on. There's a lot going on here, but overall I think it was a good book and I would recommend it. So that is Rabbit Cake. And then the last book I'm going to talk about, which is actually the book that I finished the 1st of August, but it was also in that tri-chapter video that I was just talking about, and that is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste, and this is published by Penguin Books. And this book is pretty well known, so the same author as Little Fires Everywhere, which I have read and I did really love. This book I didn't love quite as much, but I very, very much enjoyed it. And this is similar to Rabbit Cake in the sense that in the very beginning you find out that Lydia has died, and Lydia is the eldest daughter in the Lee family, which consists of her 2 parents and her slightly younger brother and her pretty significantly younger sister. And this one is much more of a mystery, and this one follows each POV from all of the family members, and each of them is trying to find out what happened to Lydia. So the police don't really know what happens in the beginning, and they're all trying to piece together these fragments of information that they have about Lydia that the rest of the family doesn't know. And kind of taking that one piece of information that they know and trying to see if they can figure out what happened to her. This has, you know, what it means to be an immigrant in the US at this time. This takes place in the 70s, and they're a Chinese American family, so Lydia's father is Chinese, his name's James, and the mother is white and her name is Marilyn. And it also covers what it's like to be in an interracial marriage, and to be biracial as a child, and has lots of good exploration of that. This also, of course, has the backdrop of the 70s, so like everything that's going on at that period. And there's a lot of expectations and pressure on every member of this family and on Lydia. And we sort of explore a family coming to terms with the kind of failures that they have had in their own lives, and then the baggage that they brought from that into this family. So this one was really interesting. Again, the writing was great. I really, really enjoyed it. I will read what Celeste Ng does next. And the one thing that I didn't like about this that wasn't quite a 5-star for me is the ending wrapped up a bunch of loose ends that we had throughout the novel very, very quickly. And it, for me, felt like a big tonal shift. So the last 10 pages were very optimistic, whereas the rest of the book was not. And it was just too abrupt of a tone shift for me, and I didn't quite like that. But otherwise, the rest of the book is phenomenal, and would still very much recommend reading it. And if you don't mind that in a book, then it will probably be great for you. So that was the only thing that I had that kind of reduced the rating for me. But that was Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. And that is the July wrap-up. So those are the 8/9 books that I read in the month of July. Let me know what you read in the month of July, and please tell me your favorite book from July, because I'm very intrigued to hear. Also, if you've read any of these books and you want to chat about them, let me know down in the comments. I'm happy to talk about any of them and see what people thought. So yeah, let me know there, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.